was a down season at first base, but even with that, still feels like a solid position, I think. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Tuesday, February 4th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, it's our 2025 first base preview. We'll talk a little bit of strategy up top, then we'll deep dive the top 12 in ADP, reveal sleepers, breakouts, busts, our favorite to draft, and then we will dive back into the rest of ADP towards the end of the pod. Let's jump right in. As mentioned, we're coming off a down season at first base, most notably Freddie Freeman, Matt Olson let us down based on where they were drafted. But there was some good. Obviously, we saw Vlad Jr. get back on track. He finished 13th overall in Roto. He was the 7th best hitter in head-to-head points leagues. You know, we were talking beforehand. It seems like we might get differing opinion here, but Scott, we will start with you. What are your thoughts on first base this year?
Thanks. I hate it. Is my thought of first base. It to me is the second weakest infield position behind second base.
You could have went back to the fart noise if you wanted to today.
No, we can't. We can't do a fart noise every podcast. Who do you think we are, Frank? No, I think it's the second weakest infield position behind second base, but first base has, I think, a clear distinction between the teams that are going to have a great one and the teams that aren't. And so that makes it feel a little more stressful than second base. And I've found so far in drafts, it is the position where I am most often getting boxed out. Like if I'm not intentional about drafting a first baseman early, then very quickly the position passes me by and I have to gamble on somebody who I don't have a great deal of confidence in. And that's never a good feeling to have that at any position. A couple interesting stats here that I just noticed today. There were only 4 first basemen who hit 30 plus home runs last year. And the high was 34. Pete Alonso actually led the position in home runs with only 34. And I didn't go back and look when the last time it was that the leading home run hitter at first base had only 34, but I have to think it was a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. And something that you pointed out recently, Scott, and I think it's a good point, is there are a lot of first base eligible players who also have other position eligibility. So Spencer Steer in the outfield, Cody Bellinger has outfield eligibility. Jake Berger has third base. Luis Ariz has second base. So again, you know, that top 12, top 15 at the position, it could go fast, and people might be using some of those players somewhere other than first base. So that, you know, could make it go even quicker than you think. Chris, what are your thoughts? Maybe a little bit more optimistic on first base.
Yeah, I wrote my first base preview today, and I ended up kind of liking the position more than I expected, which is surprising because last year was kind of a historically bad season for the first base position. Scott gave some details. I'll give a few more. Fangraphs has a feature where you can sort just production at a position. So not like, you know, primary first baseman, but he played some third base. It doesn't care what he did when he was third base. Just look at what they did when they were playing first base. This was the worst season in terms of weighted runs created plus by first baseman in any year since at least 2002. That's when their data cuts off for this stat, but it was a 107 weighted runs created plus, which I think only 3 of the previous 23 seasons had been below 110. So yeah, it was a bad season for first base, but I think there are some guys in the like 150 plus range of ADP that I really like, and I'm really talking myself into. And so I kind of think my approach to the position is like, yeah, if I can get one of the top, I guess top 5, I'm a little worried about Pete Alonso. There are some worrying signs in the profile, and obviously the lengthy free agency hasn't been ideal. If I can get one of those top 4, though, I feel okay. If not, I don't know how much I want to pay for the rest of the top 12, just because I'm not sure how much of a difference there is between Spencer Steer and Michael Toglia, who goes 80 picks later.
Well, I don't think it's a true top 12 is the thing. That's kind of why I don't like the position. Normally think in terms of 12-team leagues. I don't think the top 12 at first base is really a top 12. I think there's a Let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, you know what? It is 12. Never mind. I think the addition of
Take Salvador Perez out of there.
Yeah.
Oh, take Salvador. Okay, yeah. So it's a top 11. There you go. And obviously, as Frank mentioned, Bellinger and Steer can both be drafted as outfielders and very likely will be in some leagues. So it could be even less than 11. But yeah, I mean, only 11 deserving starters at the position, and not all of them are like surefire starters, because you got Triston Casas in there, who obviously wasn't last year. You've got Cody Bellinger, who was kind of underwhelming last year. You got Spencer Steer. Spoiler alert, I consider him a bust candidate.
I mean, even like
those are
Christian
all among the top 11.
Christian Walker's 34. You know,
Yep.
you might not think it because he's only been around for like 3 or 4 years where he's been fantasy relevant, but he's an old dude. So yeah, it's that second half of the top 12 is where I'm just not 100% sure I want to pay the prices on a lot of those guys. And because of that, you know, Michael Toglia, I'm expecting Yandy Diaz to be better than he was last year. Christian Encarnacion Strand is 100 picks cheaper than he was last year, and he only played 29 games. So I don't think we actually learned anything all that new about him. I thought he was being overdrafted last year. And I think we're all expecting pretty good things from Ryan Mountcastle. So there are some options that, like, I wouldn't feel great about them as my first baseman, but I think they're going to be okay.
I don't know. Like, I have no faith in Encarnacion Strand. Like, I feel like that could just be a wasted pick. And in the sort of deep leagues we're talking about, where you draft him as your corner infielder, you can't afford to waste a pick like that. So there are some guys I like late. There are some guys I like late at every position. But in terms of like, okay, if I wait at this position, am I going to be okay? I don't feel that way.
It feels like it's deep in just boring corner infield types. I was just looking at, top 300 ADP, outside the top 300 ADP before we started. And there are a bunch of names that are just kind of boring. They're going to play.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to hit 250 with 20 home runs, which is not exciting. But again, the deeper you go, 15-team leagues, AL, NL only, obviously those guys have more value. Do either of you guys have a specific strategy? Do you have something that you're planning on going into a draft at first base?
I find myself unintentionally waiting a lot.
Okay.
I haven't been intentional about drafting first base early, and I've said that's cost me in drafts. I feel like I don't know that I necessarily want to emphasize first base early like I did with third base a couple years ago when I felt like it was similarly scarce, because I feel like every infield position is kind of weak, except for maybe shortstop. But even shortstop, that only lasts up to a point. The depth there. So if I'm passing up a position to intentionally take a first baseman early, I think that could create other problems. So even though I say if you're not intentional about it, you can get boxed out, I don't know that necessarily means I want to be intentional about it. I think it's kind of true throughout the entire hitting pool.
And I think part of it is just, if you're intentional about drafting first base early, you're almost inevitably going to be behind the 8 ball in speed, because they're just, especially at the top end of the position, none of those guys steal bases. And so, it's really like Freddie Freeman stole a bunch in 2023, but then it came way back down to earth in 2024, and he's coming back from ankle surgery. Bryce Harper, I think, was like 7 last year.
No, you're right, Chris. You're not going to get steals at this position, but as we've talked about all offseason, it feels like
early round guys. I mean, you can get Bellinger and Steer, who might steal 20,
but you can get just steals later on in the draft.
Right. I think there's a lot more steals available throughout the draft, and the sort of players okay. Let me give you a scenario. Round 3, you got Austin Riley, you got Matt Olson. Neither one of them are giving you steals. I tend to gravitate toward Riley, because I feel like the studs at third base run out just as quickly as at first base. Maybe the mid-tier at third base I'm a little more confident in, but only a little more. And I have more confidence in Riley himself than Olson. Not that I'm not confident in Olson. I just have a little more in Riley, a little more trust, a little more willingness to use that third round pick on him. So those are the kind of scenarios I find myself facing in the early rounds at first base.
Yeah, and if you're wearing a Matt Olson shirt, Scott, you better have some confidence in Matt Olson. Come on.
I do love Matt Olson.
We actually saw a lot of movement at the position this offseason. Josh Naylor traded to the D-backs, Christian Walker to the Astros, Cody Bellinger to the Yankees, Jake Berger to the Rangers, Paul Goldschmidt to the Yankees, Nathaniel Lowe to the Nationals, and as Chris mentioned, Pete Alonso is still a free agent. So we wait to find out where the Polar Bear will be playing this season. But yes, lots of movement at first base. Let's take a quick break. Before we do that, reminder to sign up for the FBT newsletter if you haven't already. Head over to cbssports.com/newsletters. If you're signed into your CBS Sports account, all you have to do is click on the subscribe button right below the FBT logo. It's easy as that. You'll start receiving an FBT newsletter right to your email inbox for free. Chris, how many newsletters are you delivering the people nowadays?
We're going to be at least 3 per week and probably close to 5 pretty soon every week until October. So yeah.
So there you go. Sign up if you haven't already. And thanks to everyone watching us live. Make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We are marching towards 30,000 YouTube subscribers. And I think we'll maybe do something special once we get to 30K. I haven't decided what that is yet, but a little tease there. So help us get to 30K YouTube subscribers. Let's take a break and we'll be back right after this.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
Welcome back in. We are breaking down the first base position and beginning with average draft position using Fantasy Pros ADP, which takes an average of 5 different websites so far: Yahoo, CBS, RT Sports, NFBC, and Fantrax. And note that we will only be talking about players who have first base eligibility on CBS. If you go to the Fantasy Pros website, I think they use Yahoo eligibility, and it's like a jumbled mess. So I know Yahoo is very liberal with their positions and things, but we will be following CBS position eligibility. Also, I'm not including Salvador Perez because you should draft him as a catcher.
Yeah.
Not as
you could use him as a first baseman. His numbers aren't that different than like Christian Walker's. It's just that's a waste.
Yes, so please don't do that. First up, we have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. with an ADP of 15, and Vlad bounced back in a major way, hitting .323 with 30 home runs on .940 OPS, the best that he's looked since that massive 2021 season. What changed for him? He just hit the ball harder. He also cut his hair, but, it is what it is. But yeah, he hit the ball hard, 93.8 average exit velocity, nearly a 14% barrel rate for Vlad Jr. We did see some down seasons in 22 and 23. Scott, what are your expectations here for Vlad entering a contract year, assuming he doesn't get an extension done by opening day?
I expect him to be the top first baseman in fantasy. I'm still a little wary of it because he was hitting the ball hard every year. His StatCast page was lit up in red every year. And obviously he disappointed 2 years in a row. 2022, 2023 was not a first round caliber bat.
Only one of those seasons was actually an underperformance. This is something that I think has been a little lost in the Vlad discussion because there was a lot of like, well, he's just going to underperform. But actually, 2021, bang on his ex-WOBA. 2022, right there, 351, 351. 2023, way underperformed, 378 ex-WOBA, 340 WOBA. And then last year, underperformed a little bit, but 10 points is probably noise. So 3 out of his 4 seasons, and even going back, it's only 1 season where he's actually underperformed the expected stats. The difference is that 2022 season, he just wasn't as good.
Okay, so what is your point with that?
My point is that as long as he continues to hit the ball hard like he did last year and elevates it more, which was the problem in 2022, he took a step back there. I don't have the concern about Vlad like underperforming his expected stats. As long as the skill set is strong, and 3 out of the last 4 years it has been, I don't really have many concerns. Like I understand that because 2 of the last 3 have been disappointing, maybe the skill set will regress. But as long as the skill set is as strong as it was last year in 2023 and 2021, I don't really have much concern about Vlad's production.
He actually, in 2022, I understand the expected stats are what they are. But in 2022, his exit velocity, his max exit velocity, they were both okay. Average was 96th percentile, max was 99th percentile.
Right.
His fly ball rate was about 3 percentage points higher last year.
His line drive was also his fly ball rate was 52% that year, which was 5 points higher.
Well, without throwing a bunch of numbers at people, it seems like very small distinctions between the exit velocities and the spray angle off the bat for Vladimir Guerrero the past 3 years. And I mean, he was a letdown 2 years in a row. Last year, he obviously lived up to the 3rd round price tag and then some. So now he's a borderline first rounder again. He hit about 350 for May on. A lot's going to depend on the batting average because he only hit 30 home runs last year. It's not like he got back to that 48 home run standard. I think home runs I think the actual home run ceiling is very much in question because of how much he puts the ball on the ground. So clear top first baseman, but not somebody who I'm excited to draft early in round 2 where he tends to go. If it's the right player to take, I'll take him, but I'm not excited about it.
Different positions, but if you're on the clock early 2nd round, would you rather have Vlad or Yordan Alvarez?
It's Yordan for me.
I think they're back to back. Yordan obviously has health considerations. I want to double check and see what I actually have. I have Alvarez ahead of Guerrero. It's the same dollar amount. They're my only 2 $35 players. Okay, I'll say Alvarez, but it might depend what position I took in round 1.
Yeah. I do love how durable Vlad has been too. He's missed a total of 12 games since the start of 2020. That is a theme that you will notice at first base. All the top options, extremely durable players over the past couple of years, with the exception of Bryce Harper, who we're about to talk about. The number 2 first baseman is Bryce Harper, an ADP of 20.2. His first full season since 2021 was a success. He hit 285 with 30 home runs, a near 900 OPS. And he has been incredibly consistent over the past 3 years between a 285 and 293 batting average, between an 877 and 900 OPS each of those seasons. Reliable early round producer, but I will nitpick just a little bit. The barrel rate dropped to 10%, 10.4%, 73rd percentile, and he did overperform his expected stats. Chris, does that worry you at all when spending a 2nd round pick on a 32-year-old Bryce Harper?
If he wasn't 32, I think it would be easier to write off because even underlying stats that are more skill indicative can fluctuate from 1 year to the next. But because he is 32, it's like, well, this could be the start of the decline. It was his lowest average exit velocity since 2018. It was his lowest expected WOBA since 2016. I tend not to worry too much about it, and I think he's a perfectly safe and viable 2nd round pick. He's not a 2nd round pick that I ever really get excited about, and I don't really think I've taken him so far, and I can't really see myself doing it. But I don't have a problem with it. It's just not what I'm likely to do.
Mm-hmm. And Bryce Harper, worth mentioning, the counting stats were a little bit down last year.
Yeah, that felt fluky.
Yeah, 85 runs, 87 RBI. Meanwhile, the Phillies were 5th in runs scored last season. Kind of feels, odd in the way that Jose Ramirez had down counting stats 2 years ago and then obviously bounced back last year and they were amazing. So I don't think I would put too much stock into that for Bryce Harper. Probably good for at least 1 IL stint per year. He hasn't played more than 145 games since 2019. But when he's on the field, obviously a very reliable contributor. Scott, better in roto categories or head-to-head points, Bryce Harper?
It's
Both.
It's
I think
not
he's
that
really good at
different.
both. Yeah.
Yeah, he walks a good amount, some years more than others, and so that helps in points leagues, but it's about the same.
All right, let's move on to the number 3 first baseman. That is Freddie Freeman with an ADP of 24. And this is the lowest Freeman's ADP has been since 2017. A model of consistency, finished as a top 24 player 6 straight seasons from 2018 through 2023. Last year dropped down to 39th overall. He's now 35 years old. It might just be that time, the start of a slow decline here for Freeman. Still solid, but his quality of contact and expected stats dropped quite a bit last year. I do think context is needed for Freeman. He played through thumb and ankle injuries, plus his 3-year-old son was dealing with a health scare off the field, which, look, for any parent, for any human out there, obviously that's something that's going to weigh on your mind while you're trying to perform at top levels of athleticism here. So, there was a lot going on with Freeman last year. Scott, are you banking on a 35-year-old bounce back from Freddie Freeman?
I think the batting average will bounce back.
Yeah,
he's still such a long history of hitting over 300. One of the best line drive hitters in the majors. I think he'll get that batting average back up from 282. I do think there are signs of decline. I think there have been signs of decline, though, and him randomly becoming a base stealer his first couple years with the Dodgers helped to mask that, because he had this additional contribution that made up for the drop in power production. Now 3 years in a row, though, with the Dodgers, fewer than 30 home runs, 21, 29, and 22 in those 3 years. So at this point, I feel comfortable saying Freddie Freeman is going to, relative to most first basemen, kind of hold you back in home runs. And dropping from 23 steals to 9 steals last year, maybe some of that had to do with the ankle injury he was dealing with, but he had no business stealing 23 bases in the first place. Let's be honest. So I'm kind of excluding Freeman from stolen bases for the most part. I'm expecting him to be just a modest contributor in home runs, but he should still be a standout in batting average, runs, and RBI. So I think he and Bryce Harper are basically neck and neck. I have Harper ahead if it comes to it at the 2-3 turn. But they're both in the same tier for me.
And Freeman missed 15 games last season, but prior to that, he missed 11 games in the 6 seasons before. So it's just incredibly durable before last season. So I would expect that again. And the counting stat upside in the Dodgers lineup is obviously tremendous.
I don't know if we mentioned he is coming back from ankle surgery.
Yeah,
he should be back by opening day or even by the Japan series, but it's a 35-year-old coming back from ankle surgery. That's a little scary.
Chris, yes or no? Just, are you willing to pay the price tag?
In a vacuum, yes. I just haven't done it yet.
And same question. I'll ask this for everyone, but it feels like he's good regardless of format. Maybe slightly better in a points league. 3.3 fantasy points per game for Freeman last year, but
yeah,
it'd be great.
No,
Probably better in points. Yeah,
he's hit so many doubles, and the plate discipline is phenomenal. So at this stage of his career, I'd say better in points.
All right, Scott, we are on to Matt Lanta, the number 4 first baseman. Matt Olson, ADP of 27.6. He is coming off a down season following a career year in 2023. Oddly enough, Matt Olson has kind of alternated these good with great seasons every year since 2018. His OPS by year, 788, 896, 734, 911, 802, 993. And then 790 last year. For what it's worth, he did finish strong. Final 2 months, he hit 289, 12 home runs, 933 OPS. And normally I would give this one to you, Chris, but I'll go back to Scott because it's Matt Olson. Are you looking to draft Olson with an early to mid 3rd round pick that it's going to cost?
I think that's fine. I think that's the right place to target him. Like I said, it's not something it's not like I'm singling him out at that point in the draft and ending up with a lot of him, but I expect Matt Olson to bounce back. I think he's just kind of a frustrating player. He goes through multi-month stretches where he's really locked in, and that was basically all of his 2023 when he set the franchise record for home runs and RBI. But then he'll also go through multi-month stretches where he's kind of lost with the swing, and that's what we saw for a lot of last year. But you pointed out, came on strong at the end. You gave the numbers over those final 2 months. I will also note he was the number one first baseman in fantasy during those final 2 months, was Matt Olson. His strikeout rate went from 28% before then to 19% after that. And we can see that strikeout rate. That's kind of the sneaky way to tell how locked in Olson is, because we see it fluctuate a lot from year to year and from month to month for him. But he has prodigious power. He certainly could lead the position in home runs again, just like he did 2 years ago. And you just hope that swing is on for more of the season than it's off.
Different positions, but Chris, in the early to mid third round, Olson and Rafael Devers have the same exact ADP. Who would you rather take?
That's one I'm going to have to check the rankings. My initial thought was Olson, just because he's not coming back from injuries to both of his shoulders. I do have Devers ahead. They are the same auction value, so it's not a strong lean either way, but I guess I'll take Devers. I'll agree with myself.
We'll point out again, durability for this position. Olson has played 162 games 3 years in a row, has not missed a game.
Look out, Cal.
He has missed a total of 6 games over the past 5 years. So if you play in a draft and hold league or NL only, where you just really need playing time and guys that are going to be out there all the time, I think Matt Olson, maybe he's someone you give a slight uptick in a format like that as well. And I would think when he's at his best, probably slightly better in a points league versus categories.
I would think better in Roto.
When he's at his best and he's striking out less than 20% of the time.
That's only happened 1 year, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, I agree with Chris, better in Roto.
All right. The number 5 first baseman is a free agent at the time of recording this. Pete Alonso, ADP of 41.2, and it does look like he's starting to decline a bit. 229 batting average over the past 2 seasons. The power came down last year, went from 46 to 34 home runs. His ISO from 287 to 219, which was a career low for Pete Alonso. The strikeouts are also going up. Oddly enough, zone contact and swinging strike rates were both the best of his career. So I think maybe the strikeout rate is a little bit artificially inflated for Pete Alonso, and maybe that could come back down a little bit, at least based on some underlying metrics. But Chris, I was going to ask, are you targeting Pete Alonso? It sounds like you're probably not, based on him still being a free agent and being a 4th round pick.
And yeah, like I have him in the, I think he's a 5th rounder for me. So it's not like I'm terribly far off, but I think I'm about a round behind his ADP. And part of it is that he hasn't signed. We don't know how that impacts a player's ability to prepare for the season. I do think it's a signal about how MLB teams view him and think he will age, but that's also like he's a first baseman. So I don't know, if Pete Alonso was a viable right fielder, he probably signs for $150 million 2.5 months ago. So I don't know how much to hold that against him for our purposes. For me, it just comes down to a skill set that does seem to be gently declining. He's an all fields type of power hitter who no longer produces truly high end exit velocities consistently. And I think that's just where you see the drop, 46 to 34 homers. I think that probably overstates the drop off, right? Because that came along with a 12 home run drop, 10 extra doubles, right? Like that, probably 5 of those doubles could have been home runs, and it doesn't really change anything about how he played, but his season looks a little different. So I think he's still a good bet for high 30s homers, but the batting average seems like it will be a detriment. And then it comes down to, okay, if he re-signs in New York and he's hitting 3rd behind Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto, get your bet slips in for Pete Alonso to lead the league in RBI, which I think he did in 2022, because that's just a huge opportunity. If he signs somewhere else, the lineup's not going to be as good. We'll see. There was an Angels report that would be pretty detrimental.
Toronto feels like it would be okay.
Toronto
Obviously
would be
not
fine.
not as good as the Mets, but yeah.
And so, we'll see where he lands. But again, it's fine if you need home runs specifically. But it's probably a home run, RBI, and run, and that's it. All he's going to help you with. So, it depends on team build.
Yeah, I'm not totally convinced of the decline here. His strikeout rate has gone up the past 2 years. His exit velocities have held very steady. And his strikeout rate was at a very low point to begin with when I say it's gone up the last 2 years. It's not low anymore. It's pretty average for a power hitter. But it just doesn't scream decline at me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably he's not hitting 271 again, which was his high in 2022 when he had the career low strikeout rate. But it's been a long-standing rule in fantasy that Matt Olson, Pete Alonso, you take whichever is coming off the worst year, whichever is being valued less in fantasy. Well, I would argue Olson's actually coming off the worst year, but Alonso's being valued less in fantasy. Mm-hmm. I still think their most likely scenario is about the same. Olson probably has the better best case scenario, but I think their most likely scenario is about the same, and they're going a round apart. You say they're going 2 rounds apart for you, Chris. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm more likely to take Alonso than Olson based on that, though I haven't taken either yet. It's worth noting.
I think, like Chris said, the best case scenario would be for Pete Alonso to wind up back with the Mets. Obviously, came up with the organization. There's familiarity there. And, if he's hitting top 4 in that lineup, the counting stats have a lot of potential. So that's what we're hoping for from a fantasy perspective. Toronto wouldn't be terrible. Angels, oh, gosh, please no.
I thought that was a good place to hit.
It's a good park,
but that lineup,
it's a bad lineup.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah. And I feel like San Francisco was kind of poking around. It makes a lot of sense for their team. Maybe not long-term. They have a first base prospect coming soon, Bryce Eldridge, but they're always starved for offense. So
yeah, I mentioned it on a podcast like 3 weeks ago that the Reds should be in on Pete Alonso. And there's been some whispers that the Red, and that would be pretty interesting. That is
his expected home run for that.
The absolute best home run park in baseball, and especially for a guy who, does live in the power alleys a lot more. So that could be, he
expected home runs by ballpark for the Reds the last 4 years for Alonso going backwards. Last 4 years, 46, 50, 48, 48. Granted, the expected home runs for any player in Cincinnati is going to be way higher than anybody else, but still, that kind of.
And that's one thing about Pete Alonso is New York's Citi Field's a tough home run park.
Yeah,
it's a legitimately tough place to hit, and we don't talk about it that way. But that just makes the career numbers even more impressive for him.
Better in roto categories or head-to-head points?
I'm probably pretty close, but I would lean roto.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll jump back into ADP. We'll do that right after this.
The clock never stops. Relive the greatest moments with uninterrupted highlights and more. It's Gareth Bale! Ronaldo! Wonderful goal! On the UEFA Champions League channel. Streaming free.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today, previewing the first base position, jumping back into ADP. We left off with Pete Alonso. And next up, we have 2 names going in round 7 of a 12-team league. Josh Naylor at 76.4 and Christian Walker at 82.4. Josh Naylor traded over to the D-backs this offseason. He's entering a contract year. He was awesome last season. 31 home runs, 108 RBI. Batting average a little bit lower than you'd like at 243, but he finished the top 35 player in Roto. 3.1 fantasy points per game, were 4th at the position. And Naylor benefited greatly from the changes to progressive field, which helped left-handed power play up across the board. We saw it with Naylor. We saw it with Jose Ramirez. We saw it with Steven Kwan. So obviously Naylor benefited from that. The move over to the D-backs, who just led all of baseball in runs scored. Obviously it's a positive lineup shift, but Chase Field actually ranks dead last in left-handed home run park factor. Scott, are you in or out on Josh Naylor, ADP right around 75?
That's interesting because, there's a big difference here between the Fantasy Pros ADP and the NFBC ADP, which we're used to looking at. He is going about 95th rather than 75th in NFBC. So I have Naylor in a very large tier, the largest tier at the position. I have him tiered with Walker, of course, but also Triston Casas, Vinnie Pasquantino, Cody Bellinger. I don't see myself reaching up to take Naylor when there are that many left in the tier. I think Naylor's fine. I think he just had his best year. It was frustrating in a way because we've seen him hit for higher average, but part of the reason his batting average suffers, even with a low strikeout rate, is that he sells out kind of hard for the home runs. I could see that becoming a problem in Arizona, but I don't really think it will. I think there's a chance the batting average bounces back a little bit. Maybe he trades off some home runs, but overall he's going to be about as valuable as he was last year. I'm just not sure it's worth what the ADP here says it is, about 75th.
One thing I will say for Josh Naylor is if you're the person who takes Elly De La Cruz in the first round, you should take Josh Naylor in the 7th or 8th because it's very rare for a player to be an RBI standout relative to their own production, right? Like your RBI typically comes from being a good hitter. Josh Naylor's contact skills make him a really, really good source of RBI. And we saw that well before last season. He had 97 RBI in 121 games in 2023. He was on 100 RBI pace in 2022 as well. Now he's getting park downgrade, but lineup upgrade. I think he is someone who will outpunch his weight in RBI at the very least.
Yeah.
So this is
projected to bat third. I just wanted to bring up behind Corbin Carroll and Ketel Marte. So that's
a great, a very good
point.
bet for 100 plus RBI.
So to get into the specifics with the batting average, Naylor hit 243 last year. The expected batting average was 257, not far apart. The previous year, he hit 308, and the expected batting average was 293.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I'm not sure exactly what happened there.
He hit more line drives in 2023 than 2024, but not by an order of magnitude.
But 293 is the big outlier for his career because he's been 254, 257, 293, 257 over the last 4 years. So
I think 260-ish is a fair expectation.
Now, the one thing is Arizona is a gigantic park. I think in terms of overall area, it's the second biggest park in baseball. And so there's a lot of room for doubles and triples out there. And so that's the one thing is like he might struggle to hit 20 homers this year because last year was the first time he'd ever hit 20 homers, right? He had 20 in 2022.
But he fell short for health most of the time.
Like it might be 2022. I don't think we're going to see another 31 homer season again from him. But I could see Josh Naylor hitting 275.
I could see him hitting higher than that. What I'm saying.
It's possible. Yeah.
I think what we're kind of trying to say here, there might be a bigger range of outcomes than we're expecting just because he could hit for better batting average.
Yeah.
The power, will the power retain? I mean, there are questions, but I think at the end of the day, if Josh Naylor is the player he's been the past couple of years, he'll be a productive one for fantasy.
We don't know exactly what the production is going to look like, but he's probably going to trade off batting average for home runs to some degree and wind up overall in about the same place.
I think I'm actually out personally just because he's had trouble staying healthy. You're buying off of a peak year. Quality of contact took a huge step back in the second half. And his ADP is right next to Christian Walker. And in a vacuum, I'll take Walker every time over Josh Naylor. So I don't think it's going to be for me, but better in roto categories or head-to-head points?
Definitely points because of how little Naylor strikes out. And for sure, I would take Naylor over Walker in points.
Yeah.
He had head-to-head points per game last year. He was a true standout, 310. That was a little bit behind Freddie Freeman.
I did want to, let's see what that was in 2023 real quick. The point per game average.
I would guess it was pretty similar because he had so many RBI in 2023.
3.2 fantasy points per game for both, by the way, Josh Naylor and Christian Walker in 2023. Let's talk about Christian Walker, who signed with the Astros this offseason. He missed just over a month with an oblique strain last year, but has been incredibly consistent over the past 3 seasons, between an 803 and 830 OPS, between a 249 and 257 XBA, between a 460 and 484 xSlug. So you kind of know what to expect now. He is moving into a different park, so I guess there could be questions for any player that signs in a new location, but it's a pretty damn good park to hit in, especially being in Houston as a right-handed power bat. Feels like it would work out pretty well for Christian Walker. Obviously, it's a lineup downgrade going from the top scoring team in baseball to the Houston Astros, but, batting 4th or 5th behind Yordan Alvarez and Altuve, I think there will be plenty of RBI opportunities for Christian Walker. Chris, what do you think? If you're on the clock, need a first baseman, sounds like maybe you'll take neither, but if you had to take one, Christian Walker or Josh Naylor?
I do have Christian Walker 2 spots ahead in my overall rankings, so it's not a strong conviction there. The only thing is, like Scott said, these 2 guys are at the top of a large tier. And I have the same guys in that same tier. They're separated by about 20 overall picks in ADP, Christian Walker and Spencer Steer at the high and low end. So it doesn't make a ton of sense to take the top ones. But the thing about Christian Walker, and I actually think you're downplaying how consistent he's been for, frankly, even longer than you gave him credit for, because you look at the last 6 seasons entering 2025. So going back to 2019, 824 OPS, 792, 697. 2021 was a disaster. He was terrible. 804, 830, 803. He's been between a 792 and an 830 OPS in 5 of the last 6 seasons. I think Christian Walker, he actually, I think, had a career high average exit velocity last season.
Yep.
And it's a nice park upgrade, lineup downgrade, but still a good lineup, like you said. Christian Walker is about as safe a bet for 30 homers and 100 RBI as any 34-year-old can be. The problem is he's 34, and literally everything we just said about Christian Walker, if you run the tape back to 2021,
I was going to make the same point.
It's exactly what we would have been saying about Jose Abreu. Sorry, 2022. He was coming off a down year, but we were still pretty optimistic. And so it's just, you don't know when the 34-year-old slugger is going to fall apart. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't necessarily expect it to happen.
Well, strikeout rate was up 5 percentage points last year. His second half was terrible, injury shortened by an oblique, so got only about 100 at bats, but it was bad. I don't like. There were more worrisome signs for Jose Abreu when he signed with the Astros.
Yeah, his power completely disappeared.
But I'm not totally at ease with Walker. I don't want to oversell the safety.
One thing I'll point out with the strikeout rate, which was up, as you mentioned, the zone contact, swinging strike rate, and chase rate, all basically in line with previous seasons. So I don't know if there was anything to that strikeout rate being up, but maybe bounces back a little bit. If I'm on the clock, I would take Christian Walker over Josh Naylor this upcoming season. Roto, better in Roto or head-to-head points? Walker.
I think about the same.
Yeah.
Okay. 4 names going between rounds 8 and 10. We have Spencer Steer at 95.4, Cody Bellinger 97.6, Triston Casas 101.2, and Vinnie Pasquantino 107.6. Spencer Steer has become a useful player who squeezes the most out of his skill set, but it was a valuable skill set. One of 12 players to go 20 homers, 25 steals last season. Don't see why he would slow down. He's 40 for 46 in stolen base attempts over the past 2 years. The batting average came way down from 271 down to 225. It feels like you're walking a tightrope, but the facts are facts. Spencer Steer has been a top 60 player 2 years in a row. Scott, sounds like the facts don't matter to you because you're probably out on Spencer Steer.
I mean, the skill set is just so bad. And if he played anywhere but Cincinnati, I don't think it would work. And I think it's barely working in Cincinnati. I had Spencer Steer as a bust going from his rookie to his sophomore season. And though that didn't materialize, he took a step back. Particularly in the second half last year, Spencer Steer hit 198 with a 634 OPS in the second half, and the overall batting average was low 220s. So it's a tightrope walk, and you could see how things don't seem as crowded in Cincinnati as they did at this point a year ago, but there's still enough young up and comers there that you could see how if Spencer Steer is hovering around the Mendoza line and Noel V. Marte's breaking through, Kristen Encarnacion Strand's breaking through. Gavin Lux is maybe fixed in the outfield. You could still see a scenario where Steer gets squeezed out if he's not rocking and rolling, because I don't think he's a first division regular. It's the bottom line. So we're at a point now where the quality first base options are running out, and you got a rare base stealer at the position. I understand the appeal. I just think the downside outweighs the upside for me with Spencer Steer.
Yeah, it feels a little like Isaac Paredes, where we know, like Frank said, you're walking a tightrope with him, and he's probably fine if he stays in Cincinnati. It is actually funny. He's been better both years away from home than he has been at home, which I don't think anybody would expect.
Yeah, I just think that's
that's very close. But it does seem like one, especially if there was a trade where the bottom could really fall out, and he's just wringing the most out of what he has, and what he has isn't huge, but double eligible, potentially could gain triple eligibility again like he had last year. He was first base, second outfield last year. I think he's played some third at various points. So probably a fine player to have around. It just, I'd prefer it around 120th overall, whereas he's going, 25 picks higher than that?
Yeah, just inside of the top 100 there for Spencer Steer. He's better in roto categories, right?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
But he does.
His play discipline's okay.
His play discipline's really good.
Well, yeah, that's actually a good point, because he's clearly a liability in batting average at this point, and yet the plate discipline's good. Batting average doesn't have direct impact in points league, so he may actually be better in points. 2.88 points per game last year. That was more than Pete Alonso. So I'm going to say Steer's better than points.
Yeah, I think it's probably just useful in both if he continues to do what he's done the past couple of years, and obviously we do have some skepticism that will remain for Spencer Steer. Let's move on to Cody Bellinger, long time coming, traded over to the Yankees this offseason in basically a salary dump, and he did miss some time last season with a fractured rib and then a fractured left middle finger. Bellinger has reinvented himself with the Cubs the past 2 years. He's sacrificed exit velocity for contact. He's striking out a lot less than he did in his last couple of years with the Dodgers. But as a result, we're not getting big exit velocities, massive power numbers from the past either. He took a big step back from 2020 in 2023. But Chris, how much does that matter now that Bellinger is playing his home games in Yankee Stadium, which feels like a match made in heaven?
Yeah, I think it's 2 steps forward, 1 step, or 2 steps backwards, 1 step forward. Yeah. So I don't think he gets all the way back to where he was in 2023, just because it never made sense. He wasn't a 30 homer skill set guy. He wasn't a 307 batting average guy. He definitely wasn't both of them in a sustainable way, but 270, 25-ish homers, probably at the high end, but you never know with Yankee Stadium. I think a big question is how much does he run? Because he dealt with a lot of injuries last year. That's one thing that we haven't talked a lot about with Cody Bellinger. But remember, he fractured his rib at the end of April, came back in basically 2 weeks. I think he missed about 17 days. Then he missed about 18 days with a fractured left middle finger that he ended up playing through. And then he had a hamstring injury later on that only cost him a couple of days, but it was just a lot of stuff going on. And so I'm hoping that's the explanation for why he only stole 9 bases. Remember, the Cubs just didn't run in the first half of last season. Nobody on the Cubs stole a base in the first half of the season. Nico Horner had like 5 steals in the first half. It was ridiculous. And so maybe it's just that Cody Bellinger was hurt by the time he had the opportunity to steal bases like the rest of his teammates. That could explain it. I think we get the bounce back. It's probably decent production all the way around, like a B- in all 5 categories, maybe. But that can be that can be a pretty good player, as Spencer Steer has showed us the last couple of years.
Well, I mean, I expect Cody Bellinger to hit for more average than Spencer Steer.
Yes.
But otherwise, the numbers might look the same. And with even though Bellinger, he hit only 18 home runs, he did not have a good power year last year. Expected home runs at Yankee Stadium, 24. It was his 3rd best expected home run park. Obviously makes sense. Left-handed hitter, short porch and right. So I think he gets back to the 25 to 30 homer range if he's healthy, plays every day. And if he can get to 15 to 20 steals, run and RBI production should look good. I consider Cody Bellinger a bit of a sleeper this year, and I just straight up prefer him to Spencer Steer.
Mm-hmm. Better in a categories league or head-to-head points?
You know, he actually had, even though he had a down year, he was right at 3 points per game last year. Better than Christian Walker, better than Spencer Steer, better than Pete Alonso, better than Matt Olson. So I'm going to say points, but we're talking about him like he could be a 5 category contributor. So it's not like I don't know. Maybe he's just kind of good in both, Bellinger.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's talk about Triston Casas, former top prospect, still just 25 years old. We're waiting to see what he can do over a full season. He had that big second half back in 2023. He was a popular breakout candidate last year, and then Casas suffered a rib injury in April. He missed the next 3 months or so. He was limited to just 63 games overall. Power seems legit. The barrel rate is up over 13% 2 years in a row, but the strikeout rate also jumped all the way up to nearly 32%. Scott, it feels like there's a pretty wide range of outcomes here for Triston Casas. What are you expecting?
I don't really know what to expect anymore from Triston Casas, and I've been reluctant to draft him because now we're getting toward the end of the tier. This is a part of the reason I get boxed out at first base is because, okay, well, Walker and Naylor, there's still too many first basemen left in this tier, but now we're getting toward the end of it, and I'm kind of queasy about Triston Casas. I loved him as a prospect. I thought he was a cinch breakout last year because he was coming off that huge second half. Remember a slash line that second half?
It was a 45 homer pace. It was monstrous.
Yeah, that second half. I pulled up the wrong year.
317, 417, 617.
There you go. That was the second half slash line. And Triston Casas coming up through the minors, he got compared to Joey Votto and Freddie Freeman and Cody Bellinger back when that meant more than it does now. And then he had a second half like that. It's like, okay, it's all coming together. This guy's about to break through. But even before the rib injury, the strikeouts were way up. And what was going on with that? It was early in the year when basically nobody was hitting around the league. So maybe he should get a pass for it. And he was just a bit victim of bad timing with the injury. That's the prevailing theory, I think, for Casas. But I'm not strong enough in that theory that I really want to stake my season to him. So I think I'd have to get him at a discount.
Yep.
Most projections have Casas between a 240 and 250 batting average, right around 30 home runs. I think that's, if he's healthy, I think that's a fair projection. The upside could be he hits 270, 280.
I think he has a lot of batting average upside.
I think the ceiling is Matt Olson.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think he has quite. I would give him more batting average, less power. It's just he's got to get that strikeout rate back down.
Yeah, the part of it is the park. Fenway's a really tough place for left-handed power hitters.
But he's good at fly balls to the opposite field, so he's going to bang a lot of the doubles off the green monster in theory.
Yeah, and so he's kind of the default breakout pick at first base. And when I do my sleepers, breakouts, and busts, I go by position. I just like to give myself the rigid structure. And it's kind of just this redo it from last year. Let's see what he looks like when he's healthy. I still remain optimistic. I wish I trusted it more, like Scott said.
Better in categories or head-to-head points? if Casas is the best version of himself?
Probably categories, just if he's going to strike out as much as he has.
He walks so much, but yeah, I'm really curious to see whether the strikeout rate is 24% or 32% like last year, because that'll make a big difference for how I view Casas going forward.
Zone contact rate was 74% last year. That's really bad. And for his career, it's only 76.6%. League average is 82. There's a lot of swing and miss here.
All right. Vinnie Pasquantino seems to have developed into a fine player. He's aggressive at the plate, but he makes a ton of contact. 12.8% strikeout rate, tied for 7th best in all of baseball. Hits the ball hard. The problem, he doesn't optimize for power. It's a lot of line drives. He doesn't pull the ball. I think it's tough to hit for power in Kansas City as well. You know, even if he just repeats what he did last season, I think we're looking at a quality player here with Pasquantino. 260 to 270, maybe 23 to 25 home runs. And he's in a great RBI spot, hitting behind Bobby Witt, Salvador Perez, Jonathan India leading off of that team. Chris, I like Vinnie P as a high floor option, especially the deeper leagues you go.
Yeah, I kind of think he's just like a discount Josh Naylor, where I'm not sure he's likely to hit 30 homers. Quality of contact's very good, but we haven't really seen that from him. I'm not sure he's going to be helpful in batting average, despite the fact that he doesn't strike out very much, but he's going to drive in a ton of runs. It was 97 in 131 games. I think that lineup's going to be worse than it was last year. So I don't expect, you put that on per pace and it probably comes out to like 115. I don't think he's going to get that, but seems like a pretty good bet for about 100 RBI. Seems like a pretty good bet for 20 to 25 homers. I don't know how much growth I expect from him as a 27-year-old, but it's possible there's still some room for Vinnie Pasquantino to take a step forward. We did see a little better production in the second half last year, which was nice to see before the injury.
Final 52 games, he had 300 with an 815 OPS.
Yeah. So if all he is just cheaper Josh Naylor, I think he's a perfectly fine pick. There is, I think, a little bit more room for him to grow. I think you can put everything together and get him to 280, 28 homers, 110 RBI. That seems like a reasonable best case scenario.
It does seem like he'll have to maximize the road home run outcomes, because he is, you look at his expected home runs by ballpark on StatCast page, Vinnie Pasquantino we're talking about. Put him anywhere other than Kansas City, he's hitting 5 to 10 more home runs. So it's kind of unfortunate he's where he is, but at least the lineup has improved enough around him that he can get a good RBI total and should hit for a high enough average.
Feels like he's better in a points league, right? Just that low strikeout rate.
Definitely.
He only had 64 runs in 131 games. So
yeah, he's a very bad athlete who,
I mean, I wouldn't call him a bad athlete, Chris.
For a major league baseball player.
There you go. He's much better than us, Anyway, let's talk about Jake Burger, traded over to the Rangers. I should probably mention his ADP. He rounds out the top 12, by the way. Jake Burger, ADP of 133.2, the round 11-12 turn in a 12-team league. Jake Burger traded over to the Rangers this offseason. Huge lineup and park upgrade. Burger has had 2 similar seasons in a row, 250, 29 to 34 home runs. Got off to an awful start last season, but over the final 3 months, hit 278 with 22 home runs and 889 OPS. Awesome StatCast numbers during that time. Kind of a one-trick pony. He doesn't get on base. He's a bad defender. I mean, those are more so things from a real-life perspective.
I don't know. He's a better defender than you are, Frank.
Is he though? Nah, he definitely is. We all loved Burger last year. What about this year, Scott?
So I obviously got burned by Burger last year and was pretty much writing him off when he was still with the Marlins, and even when he first got traded to the Rangers, because it seemed like he'd be a role player there. But then they traded away Nathaniel Lowe, which means they sought out Burger, a low OBP guy with bad defense who bats right-handed. They saw him as an upgrade.
Yeah, a worse player.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could make the case he's a worse player is my point, but they saw him as an upgrade over Nathaniel Lowe, which I think is a good vote of confidence there from the Rangers. Obviously, a much better lineup, a better ballpark, and for what it's worth, he hit 22 of his 29 home runs in the final 3 months. So I don't want to just say, okay, that's who Jake Burger is from now on. Take the second half numbers, apply them to the full season, because that's kind of what I did last year. And
that's never gone wrong before.
But I do think you can pencil him in for 30 homers with a not bad batting average, and probably enough RBI production to make him a quality starter. I don't know. Maybe I need to move him up into that higher tier. The more I talk about him, the more I talk myself into it, and then we will have 12 true starters at first base.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well,
It just sound unconvinced.
For me, it's just like there is zero margin for error here, because if he's not a 30 homer guy, he's just not a good MLB player.
Yeah.
And so it's a big bet. And the Rangers have talked about, there's been some reporting that, like, specifically they thought that they didn't do well enough against fastballs last year and they didn't have enough power. And that was why they went and got Jake Burger. I don't love that reasoning. Nathaniel Lowe's just better at pretty much everything except for hitting power, but whatever. That's the decision they made. And once they got rid of Lowe, the playing time seems a lot safer. It's fine. It's a good power bat who doesn't really do much else, but he might get 90 RBI in this lineup.
Yeah.
He feels like it feels like we should value Burger about like we used to value Rhys Hoskins when he was with the Phillies.
Sure. Yeah. Not in points leagues.
Yeah. No. Jake Burger, look, he's not going to steal any bases, but he's definitely better in a categories league because the plate discipline is abysmal. So you don't want Jake Burger in a points league. My only thing, like, talking about the downside, the Rangers have some solid depth pieces. They also have a lot of injury-prone players, so anything can happen. But if Burger gets off to, like, a slow start the way he did last year, he might find his way on the bench. So I think that's one of the outcomes here for Jake Burger if he does get off to a slow start. Let's get into some sleepers, breakouts, and busts at the first base position. We're actually pacing slower than we did yesterday. So let's keep this moving here, and we will start with Chris, a sleeper at first base.
I went with Davison De Los Santos, but this is more of a deep sleeper. He's a Marlins prospect who hit 40 homers as a 21-year-old in AA and AAA last year. I don't think he's going to be on the opening day roster, but spring training, he could absolutely mash his way there. I kind of think they're going to run through Matt Mervis and Kyle Stowers and give those other guys a chance just because they're older. But I think we see Davison De Los Santos fairly quickly, and last year was really impressive. So as a deep sleeper, I think he has some appeal. I'll also say Christian Encarnacion Strand. He's 100 picks cheaper than he was last year. I get the concerns. Maybe we'll talk a little more about him later, but I'm going to take the chance at a 231 ADP.
Yeah, my only thing with Encarnacion Strand is, like Scott said earlier, if you play in a deeper league, I just don't know what to expect at all for the playing time. It's just the Reds have all of these different players, and they're expected to have Steer at first base and Candelario at third, and maybe Gavin Lux.
Well, yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like I kind of feel like Encarnacion Strand may be competing with Noel V. Marte for one of the corner infield spots, with Candelario moving across the infield, depending who wins it.
I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If he's good, it won't matter. And if he's not, it won't matter.
Right. The cream rises to the top.
Yeah, that's
if he has a good spring, then we're probably all getting excited and moving him up the rankings. And if that happens, he's probably a starter on opening day and playing every day there moving forward.
He was Davison De Los Santos before Davison De Los Santos.
Yes.
So,
and I actually think Davison De Los Santos, if you're looking for a comp for him, Jake Burger might be it. Bad plate discipline, but tons of power.
The ADP for De Los Santos, by the way, 360. So a name in the deepest leagues that you can look for. CES Encarnacion Strand, the 2023 minor league numbers: 331 batting average, 20 home runs, a 1042 OPS. Then he got called up, hit 13 more home runs with the Reds the rest of that season. Scott, over to you. I believe that you have two sleeper picks here.
Yeah.
And whichever one you don't take, I'm going to take the other one. So,
well, I already mentioned Bellinger, so I won't get into that again.
Not even Bellinger. I was thinking about two other names.
You might have three, actually.
Well,
How many do you have?
I may have flipped. The other one you're thinking of, I may be my breakout choice here.
Okay.
So sleeper, I'm going to go with Jonathan Aranda, who is going very late, around 350-ish. And actually, there was a report just today that it looks like, as I expected, he's penciled in to be the Rays' full-time DH this year, which is what he was trending toward becoming last spring as well, when he broke his ring finger, needed surgery, missed a couple months, came back and did not look the same, was striking out at an astronomical rate. And that had never been an issue throughout Aranda's minor league career. Like, he's a back control, plate discipline specialist. So it was totally odd that he was doing that, coming back from that finger surgery. Then he strained his oblique and missed an extended stretch with that. And when he came back, he looked fine again. His strikeout rate was back down. Final 32 games between the majors and minors, Aranda hit 289 with 9 homers and a 958 OPS. His strikeout rate 17.6% during that time. So that seemed more like Jonathan Aranda. And I'll remind you who Jonathan Aranda was before last year, before those injury struggles and the fluctuating strikeout rate. In 2023, 95 games at AAA, he hit 339 with 25 homers and a 1063 OPS, had a walk rate that would have ranked third among major leaguers, had exit velocity readings that compared to Marcell Ozuna and Corey Seager. So he makes tons of contact. He makes very hard contact, great plate discipline, and seems to have an open lane for playing time. I think this is Jonathan Aranda's year finally. I'm going to be drafting him late in a lot of those leagues where you go deep into the hitter pool.
Yeah, another deep sleeper, Aranda. 351 is the ADP. So if you play in those deeper formats, him or Davison De Los Santos, you could take a shot on one of those guys. Sleeper for me is going to be Ryan Mountcastle, whose ADP is at 260. Regularly hits the ball hard year in and year out, but the power has suffered because of those dimension changes that they made in Baltimore. Well, now they're pulling the left field walls back in, and according to StatCast, Ryan Mountcastle has lost an estimated 10 home runs over the past 3 years. So I'm expecting him to bounce back, assuming health. He has missed some time the past couple of years, but if healthy, in the middle of a really good Orioles lineup, 260 plus, 25 plus home runs, I think that is attainable for Ryan Mountcastle this upcoming season.
So I'm going to jump in here because this is my breakout pick, and then we won't have to cover that again. I agree. Remember, Mountcastle had 33 home runs the year before they moved back the fences. And if I'm kind of assuming Camden is going to play like a standard park, it's going to be neutral, fairly balanced now that they're moving the wall in pretty much all the way in left center and about halfway closer to the corner. And you put Mountcastle in a neutral park the past 3 years, he'd have like 15 more home runs. So I'm penciling him for 25, 30 in a great up and coming lineup. And he's going so late relative to my expectations for him. I think Mountcastle is going to be the first baseman I draft most often this year. Just if I get squeezed out in the early rounds of first base, it just doesn't line up for me to take a Bryce Harper or Matt Olson, somebody like that. Then I might just, particularly in Roto, I might just wait until late and fill that spot with Mountcastle. Maybe he'll be my corner infielder instead, but I could live with him as my first baseman because I don't know that I'm any less confident in him than I am in Triston Casas. Casas has more upside, fine. I don't know that I want Mountcastle on a points league because he doesn't walk much, but I'm talking for those deep Roto leagues where you're going to be weak somewhere anyway. I think Mountcastle is the way I'd like to be weak at first base.
Chris, over to you for a breakout at first base.
So I mentioned that in Breakouts 1.0, Triston Casas was like the default option, but I have a better one that I feel more strongly about, one that I have an actual case for beyond just, well, last year doesn't count, which is basically the case for Triston Casas. Michael Toglia, who you're going to say, oh, he hit 217, 218, actually, guys. Correcting myself there. He had a 244 XBA. That is not particularly impressive, but it is better than 218. I'm good enough at math to do that. There have been 76 seasons by a Colorado Rockies player in the StatCast era. So that is dating back to 2015. That is 10 seasons. 56 of these 66 players outperformed their XBA in that season. These are Colorado Rockies players. That's what you would expect. Coors Field is the biggest inflationary force in baseball. Every Rockies player who has qualified outperformed their XBA by an average of 18 points. Michael Toglia is the only one to underperform their XBA by more than 25 points. He underperformed by 26. Only one other player has underperformed by even 15 points. This is all to say that Michael Toglia might hit 260 next year. And that wouldn't be surprising, even with a 32% strikeout rate. And he only played 116 games. He hit 25 homers, stole 10 bases. You just give him what he did last year over a full set of games with a 260 batting average. That's an easy top 10 first baseman, and it might be like a top 6 first baseman. So I'm not saying that's the likeliest outcome, but you don't exactly have to spin a yarn here to get a really, really good outcome for Michael Toglia. Now, I recognize this is all stuff we were saying about Nolan Jones last year. Coors Field is not a panacea. It does not fix everything, but there's a lot pointing in the right directions for Michael Toglia.
And the ADP is completely different. Nolan Jones was a top 50, top 60 player. Michael Toglia is 190.6. So kind of an afterthought.
Yeah. You know? I mean, I've taken Michael Toglia in one of those roto scenarios where I get left out at first base, and it may turn out great. Like the upside, you make a strong upside case, but he does feel like a boomer bust play. And I'm trying to avoid those in those deeper roto leagues just because I feel like I've leaned into them too much, looking to obviously improve my team's best case scenario in a league where I'm trying to finish first, but then too often got the downside case and struggle to compete. So yeah, I mean, it just kind of depends on the depth of the league for me, whether I'm going to gamble on Toglia.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think you can get away with it in a 12-team roto league. If you play in like a 12-team head-to-head categories league where it's only 3 outfielders, 1 first baseman, 2 utility spots. Yeah, one of your bench pieces and just see what happens. Daily lineup league, just play him whenever he's in Coors Field. I think a really intriguing player, but boomer bust is probably a good way to put that there on Michael Toglia. Breakout for me is going to be Tyler Soderstrom from the Athletics, who former top prospect, held his own in 61 games last year, 233, 9 home runs, 743 OPS, crushed the minors last season as well. He hit 279. He had a 991 OPS in 33 games at AAA. He hits the ball hard, 91.9 average exit velocity, nearly a 15% barrel rate for Soderstrom, and he is penciled in at first base with Rooker expected to DH or play the outfield once he's completely healthy. And we do think a slight park upgrade playing in Sacramento versus being in Oakland. So if everything works out here for Soderstrom, you know, like I'm not expecting a good batting average, but like, can he get to 30 home runs? I don't think it's crazy. And I think he's going to play a lot. So yeah, deeper leagues as like a power upside play. I'm looking at Tyler Soderstrom for a breakout. Scott, go ahead.
My bust?
Yes.
My bust is Spencer Steer, but I've already said everything I have to say about him. Have we just declared that our preferred late round flyer first base for me, Jonathan Aranda, for you, Frank Soderstrom, for you, Chris Davis and De Los Santos? Is that where we're at?
De Los Santos is tough just because I'm not sure he's going to be on the opening day roster. So it would probably be like Christian Encarnacion Strand if we could count him.
Okay.
I didn't know if you wanted to go with that at all, Scott, or
no. I just was, underlining something that I saw.
Okay. Chris, do you have a bust at first base?
Pete Alonso. I don't disagree with Steer. I had a really hard time coming up with my sleeper breakout and bust picks for first base just because especially the sleeper and bust parts, I just don't feel that strongly about a lot of guys. And so there were some like kind of default answers, and Alonso's probably the one for me.
Mm-hmm. For me, it's going to be one of Josh Naylor or Jake Berger. I don't think, well, I guess Berger could bottom out, but I just think they're slightly overvalued in ADP right now. Josh Naylor, you're buying at the peak. It's a bad park shift. He's had trouble staying healthy. I mentioned all those things. And Jake Berger obviously needs to avoid getting off to a slow start with the Rangers, but he does come with some upside as well. Just give me a name here, most likely to draft. And if you want to give me a first baseman and like a corner infielder, feel free, but who do you think you're most likely to wind up with?
I think it's going to be Ryan Mountcastle, except in a points league. In a points league, I'll say Vinnie Pasquantino.
I think it's probably Tolia and I don't know, probably just Tolia.
Yeah. I think Christian Walker or Vinny P for me, and then Soderstrom as a corner.
Just a quick note on Naylor, since we have talked about Arizona being a bad home run park for lefties. His expected home runs, if he had played every game in Arizona last year, is 29 versus the 31 he actually hit. So StatCast doesn't think it's going to be a big deal for him. So I just wanted to put that out there because, you know, I don't want to overstate the case. I don't think it's going to be a huge problem for him.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that StatCast has that as the expected home runs, but then it's also the StatCast park factors that label it as a really bad left-handed park. So which do you believe?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously gauging Naylor's individual batted balls rather than the overall trend of the park.
It could be that it's like Chase is super, super deep in center field. So, you know, it could be just the specific places he hits his home runs, you know.
Fair enough. Let's wrap up with the rest of first base ADP to finish out the show. We left off earlier with Jake Berger. We will pick things back up with 3 first basemen between picks 160 and 200. Paul Goldschmidt, an ADP of 168.6. Luis Arraez, an ADP of 180. And Michael Toglia at 190.6. We already spoke about Toglia. Paul Goldschmidt, 1-year deal with the Yankees this offseason. 37 years old. Certainly looks like this is the beginning of the end, and we've said that before, but he's obviously a few years older now. It was a career high strikeout rate. Batting average and OPS were both career lows for Goldschmidt. He did rebound in the second half, so we'll see if he can build off of that. And then Luis Arraez, you know, no surprise, he took a big step back from his awesome 2023. Batting average, OPS came way down. He was also playing with a torn ligament in his thumb the final 4 months of the season, which he had surgery on in October. Expected to be a full participant in spring training, but you know what to expect from Arraez. Top-notch batting average, contribute runs scored, not really much else besides that. Chris, any interest here in Goldschmidt and Luis Arraez?
Arraez is the most what have you drafted already dependent player in fantasy because he's maybe a 1.5. I think you can say he's a 2 category player. He stole 9 bases and scored 83 runs last year. You put those together and that counts for 2 categories, but it's just he's the biggest standout in batting average in baseball and he really doesn't do anything else. And so I'm
going to say something weird, which is that I think Arraez is better in points leagues because he's such a liability in so many categories. But he's fine in points leagues. He's not going to be a standout performer for you, but he was better points per game than Toglia and Berger and a lot of the guys we've already talked about.
Yeah, he's appropriately priced, but it just totally depends on what your team needs. If you need that one specific thing, he can be fine, but it's just a really hard profile to build around. Goldschmidt, I kind of think I'm expecting a dead cat bounce. Like, I don't think he's as finished as his actual numbers looked last year. The underlying numbers were a little better. It's probably not anything more than a 250-ish average, but he hit, 22 homers last year?
Yeah. And 11 steals.
And 11 steals. Like, I could see another 22 and 11 season, but he hits 255 instead and has some decent RBI and run numbers in the Yankees lineup. Like, it's not a great player, but I can see a low end number 1 first baseman outcome here.
He just can't hit fastballs anymore. And that's a telltale sign of age. And it's Like you say that last year was the beginning of the end, Frank. I think second half 2 years ago was the beginning of the end, and last year was the confirmation of the end. He's dead to me. Goldschmidt's dead to me. Unless I can get him super cheap, but he's going earlier than a lot of first basemen I like more.
Yeah,
including
I think
Michael Toglia.
that's the problem is the price just isn't great. I have him ranked 191st overall, and so like I don't dislike him, but that's still 2 rounds later than he's being drafted on average.
Again, that's Paul Goldschmidt that we're talking about. According to StatCast, he hit 22 home runs last year. If he played all of his games in Yankee Stadium, it would have been 25. So take that for whatever it's worth with Paul Goldschmidt. Let's move on to outside the top 200. We have 3 names going right next to each other. Yandy Diaz at 233.4, Christian Encarnacion Strand at 235.6, and Nathaniel Lowe at 236.3. Yandy Diaz took a step back. 2023 looks like a clear outlier. It was actually just a really bad April, and from May on, Diaz hit 297 with 13 home runs and 802 OPS. One of those rare late-round players that could actually provide batting average if you're looking for that at that point in the draft. Encarnacion Strand, we've talked a little bit about. He was a popular sleeper breakout candidate last year, but he had a wrist injury, eventually needed surgery on that in June, so hoping to bounce back with some health here. And Nathaniel Lowe was traded over to the Nationals, where he should play every day for that team and hopefully improving lineup. Scott, I don't think there's big upside for someone like Lowe, but if you play in a deeper league, I think 260 with like 18 to 20 home runs is a fair expectation.
Yeah, I think Nathaniel Lowe is the sort of player you want no part of in a shallow league where you're going to have an ample waiver wire and you're just trying to maximize output. But in a deep league where you need to play it safe, he seems like a very safe choice to get a lot of at-bats and put up useful enough numbers. I think he could get his home runs back over 20. He should get on base at a better than average clip, and play a lot. I think he'll be useful in that way. Nate Lowe.
The problem with Yandy Diaz and Nathaniel Lowe is they're both better in points leagues, and they're probably not still good enough to be top 12 first baseman in points leagues.
Right. Yeah. Shallower rosters in points leagues, but that's their better format. Though Yandy Diaz in the past, and I'm not talking about his 2023 career season. That's never going to happen again. Career high for batting average and home runs. It's not going to happen again. But seasons prior to that, he would verge on top 12 status in points leagues.
I mean, he's still hit 281 last year with great plate discipline.
Yeah. I'm not crazy about him because he's getting older. And I think there's a scenario where he begins to lose playing time if, let's say, Jonathan Ronda goes off. But yeah, he's fine in a deep league sort of way.
Again, that's Yandy Diaz. We were just talking about 3 names between picks 250 and 275. Ryan Mountcastle at 260, Rhys Hoskins at 271, Michael Busch at 275. And Ryan Mountcastle, we spoke about sleeper breakout potential this upcoming season. Rhys Hoskins, his first year back from a torn ACL, the worst season of his career. It was also in a new environment playing in Milwaukee. Typically a pretty good place to hit, but only hit 214, 26 home runs is solid, but a 722 OPS. And Michael Busch, first season with the Cubs, very solid, 248, 21 home runs, 775 OPS. He has a good eye at the plate, 335 on base percentage. He hit the ball hard. And I expect him to be in the middle of an improved Cubs lineup, one that has Kyle Tucker and Matt Shaw. So Michael Busch is another name where if I miss out on Mountcastle or, if I in a deeper league where, I'm worried about Soderstrom's playing time, maybe a little bit. Michael Busch, I think, is just going to play every day and be pretty solid.
It wouldn't surprise me if Busch was much better this year than last year, because that's kind of the way his minor league career went, where when he got a second chance at a level, he was a monster after looking kind of boring initially. But that's not what I'm betting on. Hoskins and Busch both, I think the playing time concerns are prohibitive for me. I understand Hoskins bats right-handed and he played every day in Philadelphia, but he sat a lot for Milwaukee last year. And I kind of expect that to continue. The fact Mountcastle is listed among this group, I think, just underscores the point of how good a value he is, because he does not seem to belong with these other first basemen.
Two names between 280 and 300. We have Jake Cronenworth at 292, Spencer Torkelson at 299. Cronenworth, another just boring player, but he plays a lot, and he was okay. He hit 241, 17 home runs, 83 RBI, 5 steals, and a 714 OPS. I think a name that you can look at, again, in some of those deeper mixed leagues or NL-only formats. And Spencer Torkelson, former first overall pick, followed up his breakout 2023 with a dud. Hit 219, 10 home runs, a 669 OPS. Quality of contact took a huge step back. And now, Chris, we don't even know if Torkelson's going to play. They have Colt Keith at first base, Kerry Carpenter at DH. The ADP has taken a huge tumble this year, but I just don't really know where the playing time is going to come from for Torkelson.
Yeah, he wasn't that good at AAA either when he got sent down. He struck out 85 times in 58 games down there. So there was one report that the Mets were looking at Spencer Torkelson as a possible option at first base to trade for, and that would be pretty interesting. But the combination of mediocre, maybe decent, average-ish lineup in Detroit, really declining skills, a pretty uninspiring combination there. Cronenworth, I think, Frank, you said better, actually sneaky, viable deep league option because the counting stats are always pretty good, but nothing to get excited about at all.
And then a bunch of potentially useful names going outside the top 300. And when I say useful, again, it's deeper formats. These are guys that are going to play. They're locked in. Nolan Chanuel with the Angels, Luke Raley with the Mariners, Soderstrom, who I mentioned, with the A's, Andrew Vaughn with the White Sox, Spencer Horwitz was traded to the Pirates this offseason. There's still Jamer Candelario, Ryan O'Hearn, Jonathan Aranda we spoke about, Carlos Santana, Josh Bell. So lots of names here, Scott. Anyone that stands out that you might be targeting as a deeper league corner infielder? Outside of Aranda, we know you like him.
Right, yeah. He definitely stands out among this group. None of the others, I think, in leagues of any kind of standard size. So we're just talking deeper league options here. But Spencer Horwitz, I think, could do something similar to Nate Lowe for a fraction of the cost. It kind of depends how much he ends up playing. I also think Andrew Vaughn is one of those players who is much more interesting to me in a deep league because he'll hit 250 with 20 homers or so. He'll be that Ryan McMahon kind of boring that in those deep leagues where there's no waiver wire to speak of, you end up thankful that you drafted him. Even though Vaughn, obviously didn't live up to his upside, he's going to play a lot and he's going to produce okay numbers.
Can I mention two names?
Yes.
One, Josh Bell. Just there's always a stretch in every season where he's a must-start player, and it's usually only about 2 months. And it honestly, the last couple of years, I think it's been directly after he got traded. But he spent the last 3 seasons or the last 2 seasons, 2.5, playing in some of the absolute worst parks for power in baseball. You're talking half a season in San Diego, half a season in Cleveland before they changed the seat and it became a better power park, and then Miami, one of the worst. And now he's back in Washington, and his track record in Washington, it was his age 28 and 29 seasons. He's 32 now, but he had an 846 OPS in his season and a half in Washington. So I do think there's a chance Josh Bell has a better than you expect season. And then can I mention a player who's not first base eligible, but if we don't mention him here, we won't mention him at all in the position previews?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Kyle Manzardo.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
He's DH only, but was a fairly notable prospect. Took a while to develop, but when he got called up last year, I don't exactly remember what the numbers were, but he was a pretty impactful bat in the month of September.
270 with 5 home runs and an 873 OPS.
Yeah, it's not clear he's going to play every day. Might sit against some lefties, but Really, really strong minor league track record, 932 career OPS for Kyle Manzardo. Very good plate discipline. There's some power there, and it's suddenly a pretty good place for a lefty to hit. So I think Kyle Manzardo is absolutely worth mentioning here as a late round target.
Yeah, and when we wrap up all of our position previews, we'll do a recap. We'll also talk about some of the utility-only players on that episode. So we will talk about Ohtani and Ozuna, and we'll mention Kyle Manzardo and some of those late-round options.
Did we mention Carlos Santana?
We did not, but he is back in Cleveland.
Yeah, he's back as their primary first baseman with Manzardo, mostly playing DH. And he's in his late 30s. You expect it to drop off at some point, but for a late round flyer in a deep league, he could be 240, 20 homers, decent run in RBI totals.
Again, there's no shortage of just boring deep league corner infield guys. You can find a lot of them at the first base position. I'll quickly mention a few prospects that you need to know. Davison De Los Santos, we mentioned earlier, Nick Kurtz and Jack Caglione. They were first round picks for the A's and Royals respectively last season. And they could make an impact later this year.
Yeah, I think Kurtz especially. Very excited about Nick Kurtz.
And could also see Bryce Eldridge this year.
Yeah, I think he could be a late season call-up for the Giants. And wanted to mention Zach DeZenzo, first base eligible on CBS. Sounds like they could give him a chance to play some outfield in the spring. And he's got some pretty interesting minor league numbers. There's power, there's speed, and the Astros need help in their outfield. So, again, just one more real deep league name there is Zach DeZenzo. We are going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.